Hey everyone, it's Tracy, and for this week's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this retro-inspired space scene using Procreate 5X. I'm providing you with a mini set of my textured Procreate brushes, as well as the exact color palette I'm using here, and some texture image files I created to get this texture on the planets. Just click the link in the description below. When you get there, you're going to need a password, so I will go ahead and put that up on the screen right now. All right, once you have all those downloads, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've created a new document here and I've set mine to 10 by 10 inches at 300 dpi. You can set yours up to whatever size you'd like. Just keep in mind that if you're going to print this, you need to make sure that you're setting it to the largest size you plan to print so you don't run into any sort of pixelation. So I've also pulled in my color palette and set it as my default, as well as pulled in the Retro Rocket brush set. Now I've kept the texture image files off of my iPad. They're kind of waiting in the wings in an iCloud file, just because they're large and I don't want to cause any issues with my iPad. So the first thing I want to do is change my background color to a dark blue. We're going to build this illustration in layers. So we're going to start with the sky and create the stars and the nebula cloud formations. Then we're going to go ahead and create the planets and finally the rocket. So I want to go to my layers and I'm going to click on background color and I want to select this dark blue color here at the bottom right of my palette. And I'm going to temporarily change my light interface here. Okay, so we have the color in place, but we need to add our stars and some of those clouds. I'm going to go ahead and grab my Stardust brush, and I want to grab this kind of yellowish orange color, and I'm going to set my brush to about 34. I have the opacity set to about 67. Now this is a pressure sensitive brush. So if I lightly touch, I'm getting smaller stars. If I touch a little heavier, I'm getting bigger ones. And if I press down really hard, I'm getting very big ones. So I do this in various pressures across my canvas just to give that impression of depth. So the smaller stars obviously are far away. So I'm just going to go ahead and I want to make sure I'm on my next layer. And I'm just going to do, again, varying pressures, and I'm going to pick my pencil up as I do it. And you can place yours wherever you'd like. Some of these are obviously going to get covered by our rocket ship and planets. So I'm going to go ahead and fill the entire canvas with my stars. And again, varying the sizes. All right, a little gap here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is give these stars a little bit of a glow. So I'm going up to my adjustments panel here and I'm selecting bloom. And I want to do this on the entire layer. So I've gone ahead and hit layer and I'm going to slide up and you'll see it change at the top there. I'm going to go about, I'd say 60. And this is just one of those settings that you can play around with. Let me zoom in on some of these stars. So what I'm aiming for is a little luminescence as well as some of this kind of glow around the stars. I'm going to first play around with size. And the lower you go, you kind of get this luminescence in the middle here, but I also want that glow. I'm going to play with my burn and I raise that to about 50. Go ahead and change yours to however you'd like your stars to look. I have mine currently set to about 22 for the size and 49 for the burn. And I like how that looks, so I'm going to go ahead and back out of that. So now that we have our stars in place, we want to add some of those nebula clouds. I'm going to go to my next layer. I'm also going to grab one of Procreate's brushes, specifically in the luminance section, and it's actually called Nebula. And I'm going to grab one of these lighter colors, some of this off-white color. I have my brush set to about 50, and my opacity is a little bit low. Now this brush, if you press hard, you're going to get a very, very solid looking cloud. If you press lightly, you're going to get kind of a buildup, and you can keep hitting it and building up and using different pressures. So that's what we're aiming for. And I'm going to focus a lot of the attention around the corners and add a little bit throughout as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and here in the corner, I'm just going to press a little harder. And again, I'm going throughout the entire thing, but I don't want the nebula clouds to compete with the planets or the rocket ship. I'm really just looking to kind of add that ethereal feel. And I think I'm going to grab one of these yellower colors. And this is really a feel thing. It's however you'd like it to look. Now I'm going to knock back both the opacity and change the blend mode. I'm going to try lighten on this. And I like how it gives it more of that cloud-like feel and gives that kind of color around the edges. I'm also going to drop the opacity just slightly. Again, I'm not looking for this to compete with anything. Now that I've done that, I feel like it's not enough elsewhere, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit it a few spots here and there. Again, I'm not looking for these clouds to compete with my overall illustration or the other elements in it. I just want to kind of give it that ethereal space feel. And I'll just knock back the opacity just slightly. Okay, so we have our stars and our clouds in place. The next thing we want to do is create our planets, and we're going to do that with a combination of the selection tool on color fill, as well as the texture image files that I provided with the downloads. So let's take a look. Okay, we are ready to create our planets. I want to do one more change to my sky though, and I'm going to add one of my texture image files just to add a little bit more depth to the sky. So I'm going to go up to my actions here, click on insert a file, and I'm going to grab the nebula texture that I provided with the downloads. I'm going to make this a lot larger, and this is just going to add some additional clouds here. So I'll release that. And I'm going to change the blend mode. I'm probably going to end up on overlay or soft light, but let's just play around. Okay, I like soft light. What it's giving me is this kind of dusky, lighter color here that's playing off of the more rusty yellow colors here. So I like how that looks. I might just drop the opacity just slightly. And now I'm ready to begin adding my planets. We're going to add these on 2 different layers so that we have flexibility with where they're placed. And I'm going to start with my larger blue planet. So I'm going to grab this kind of teal, green, blue color. And I'm going to use my selection tool set on color fill. Now I'm going to draw out an ellipse. I want to make sure it's on its own layer. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a bunch of layers here. I'll just drag out a circle. Now it's kind of difficult to drag out a circle with the selection tool. You can't put your finger down and do it. You just have to kind of trust it, but you can always change it with the transform tool. So because I have this on color fill, when I release it, it's going to load whatever color I have in there. Now if I wanted to, I could go into my transform tool and I could just tap on the canvas and just check my size. And I can see it's not an exact circle. So I'm going to unchain this, unlink this, and I'm going to change this side to 1160 to match the other. So now I have a perfect circle. I'm going to go ahead and move this up here. And I want to go ahead and create a smaller one down here. So I'll grab this same yellowish orange color, grab my selection tool, and I want to go to a new layer. And again, I'll just draw out an ellipse, release, and it's going to fill with that color. Now I can grab my transform tool and I can tap, and it's slightly off, so I'll unlink that, and I'm going to change this to 891. Okay, now I have a perfect circle. I'm just going to drop this down to about here. Now I have snapping on, so it's snapping in certain places, or magnetics rather. I'm going to turn that off. Sometimes it kind of gets in the way. I really like it, but other times it can be somewhat irritating. So I'm going to go ahead and I think those look good. I might drop the size of this though a little bit. Again, I'm not looking for this to be the main focus of anything. Okay. All right, so we have our 2 planets in place. We want to start adding some of our texture, and we're going to do this the same way we added some of this additional texture to the sky. We're going to use texture image files. I'm going to start with the teal blue one. I'm going to tap and select the layer because I want that texture image file to be clipped to this one. I'll go back to my actions, insert a file, and I'm going to grab this lunar landing texture. And I want to roughly place it where I want it, because if I release this, anything that's outside of my canvas is going to be lost. So I just want to roughly place it where I want to use the texture. And in particular on this one, I like the texture here. So I'll go ahead and release. And I'm going to change my blend mode, but first I want to change this to a clipping mask. So now it's on the shape itself. And I'll just start adjusting my blend mode. And I'm probably going to stick with soft light. It's what I tend towards with this particular texture, but I'm just going to try a few others. Okay, I'm going to stick with soft light, and I'm going to keep it on that opacity because I actually like the amount of texture it's provided. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with our yellow planet. Again, insert a file, and I'm going to choose a different one. I'm going to choose my moon rock texture here. And make this a lot smaller. And again, I want to bring it to about where I want to use it. And I'll go ahead and release, clip it, and just see how it looks. And I'm liking that. I think I'm going to go ahead and just change the blend mode. And I think I'm going to end up with overlay on this one because I like how it gives it somewhat of a glow. But you can adjust yours to however you'd like. All right, so let's go ahead and add some light and shadow to these just to give them a little bit more dimension. They don't really have that rounded feel so much as a flat disc sitting on our canvas here. So I'm going to start with my green one, and I want to add a clipping mask. So I'll go ahead and add a layer, tap on clipping mask, and I'm actually going to use this same yellow color. Now I need to decide which direction I want my light and shadow. So I want to determine where I want my light source to come from so that I follow it on both planets as well as my rocket ship. So I'm going to have my sun come from the top right. You're not going to see it in the image. It's just going to be implied that there's a light source coming from the top right. So I'm going to grab one of my brushes, specifically this textured gouache wash. And I'm going to set it to about 35. And for now, I'm going to keep the opacity at its highest. This is a brush that builds up on itself. So I'm going to focus a lot of the build on the edges and just kind of come in. I'm just trying to add a little bit of that golden color as if the light's hitting the side there. Just brushing it around and really building up here. Sometimes it's too much, so just back out of it. All right, I like how that looks. Let me go ahead and change the blend mode. And I think I'll go with screen. It still gives me some of that yellow, but you're seeing the green texture come through in the bottom. And I'm going to keep the blend mode, or I'm sorry, the opacity exactly the same. I think I might just build up a little bit more here. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some shadowing here. I'm going to add another clipping mask. And if you drop below one of the existing clipping masks, it will automatically add it as a clipping mask. I'm going to keep that same textured gouache wash, but I want to tap my finger down here to select that color, and I'm going to make this a lot darker. And I'm just going to start doing the same thing. I'm going to brush around the edges here. So my light's coming from here, which means the shadow is going to be over here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to focus a lot of it on the very, very edge just by keeping my brush on the outside of the planet shape. All right, I'm going to go ahead and change this to multiply. That's a good setting as far as blend modes for shadow, and I'll just drop this down slightly. So now it has more of that rounded feel with the light on one side and shadow on the other. Let's go ahead and do the same thing to this planet. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer and turn it into a clipping mask. I'm going to select that color, and I want to make this a lot. I think I'm going to go with this off-white color here. I'm not going to add a color to it so much as just add light. So again, with that textured gouache brush, I'm adding a lot to the very edge. And I'm going to go ahead and change the blend mode on this to screen again and just drop it. Screen is a good one to use when you're adding a light source to something. And make this brush a little bit smaller. And of course, one of my neighbors has opted to mow their lawn right now, so I apologize for the noise in the background. I'm going to go ahead and select my color again, and I want to drop this a lot lower. So I want it to be a little darker. I'm going to add another clipping mask. Again, if you drop below an existing one, it will automatically add it as a clipping mask. And with that same brush, I'm going to focus my attention over here. So again, we're following the same pattern on both because we want it to look like the light source is coming from a unified spot. So I'll just really focus on the edge here. and a little bit there. Really build it up at the bottom here. And then I'll go ahead and change my blend mode to multiply again. Again, I'm using that for my shadows. And I'll just drop the opacity slightly. All right, I like how my planets look. So we're set at this point to start creating our rocket ship, and we're going to do that using a combination of our brushes and the symmetry tool. So let's take a look. Okay, we have our space in place, we have our planets in place. I've gone ahead and I've grouped mine together. So I have my nebula formation with the stars and the clouds in one group. And I've grouped my two planets separate from one another. That way I have some flexibility. As I create my rocket ship, I might need to move these planets around especially, but we'll see. I've also added a bunch of layers. I'm going to start using the symmetry tool to create the rocket ship. So I'm going to grab this first layer. I'll go up to my actions and select canvas. And I want to turn on drawing guide, go into edit guide, and just make sure that it's on vertical symmetry. And I keep mine up here just so it's white against this dark background. So it might be hard to see it on the video, but I've got my vertical symmetry line going down the middle here. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have that layer selected. And I'm going to grab my detail brush. The first thing I want to do is draw the body of the rocket. So I'm going to go ahead and tap this off-white color. Now I'm using the symmetry tool to make it easier to create, not to get perfection, because this is supposed to have a hand-drawn feel. And so I'm going to use a mix of the symmetry tool on some layers and not use it on others. But this just makes it a lot easier to create the body of the rocket. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw out. And I need to make sure that drawing assist is on here. If it's not showing assisted on the layer, then it's not going to give you that symmetry tool. So just make sure that that's on. And I'll go ahead and just draw that out. I'm kind of drawing like a pointed ellipse. And I'm going to drag this in. And again, I'm not looking for perfection. I like this grittiness on the outside. It gives it that hand-drawn feel. The only thing I don't like is I think I made that a little too thin. So I'm going to go ahead and start again. And I'm just going to kind of curve out a little bit more. All right. I want to make sure that there are no gaps here so that when I do my color drop, I don't have any issues with it. All right, so I like that a lot better. I'm going to go ahead and grab my kind of medium red, and we're going to do the cap of it. So again, I'm going to tap on the layer, turn on drawing assist. I'm not going to clip this just yet. I will probably at the end, but I want to make sure I'm as close as possible to where I want to be. And I'm just going to draw down. Again, I'm not aiming for perfection. And I'll draw sort of a curved line here, because that helps play into the curved feel of the rocket ship. And I'll go ahead and drop that in. And I want to use that same color to create the little legs on it. And I'm going to use the symmetry tool for that as well. So I'll tap on the layer, turn on drawing assist. I'm using that same detail brush. And I'm going to go ahead and start about here at the edge and just draw down kind of a V formation and then close it off with a curve. I just want to make sure that there are no gaps here. So you can see there are some openings, which means if I go to try and fill it, it's going to fill the whole screen. And I'm just going to go ahead and, you know what, actually I'm not liking that, but I can go ahead and grab my eraser with the same brush. So if you hold the eraser down, it's going to pick whatever brush you have. And I just want to kind of clean this up a little bit. All right. I'll go back to my brush and I'm going to draw, this one is going to be, it's from this perspective. So I want to draw a flat line. And then I'm just going to draw down to the bottom here. And I'm going to stop around the same spot as those. And again, I'll go ahead and fill this. I might move this whole layer down just slightly and maybe make it a little wider. I'm going to grab my freeform transform. All right. Okay, I like how that looks. I want to add a little bit more to the spaceship itself. Let's go ahead and add a window. So I'm going to go up to another layer. I don't need drawing assist for this, so I'm not going to turn that on. I'm going to use my symmetry tool and color fill, and the first thing I want to do is grab that dark blue color I used for my sky. And I'm just going to go ahead and with color fill on, draw out an ellipse. And actually that looks pretty good. Again, you could always go to your transform tool and just check it. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and make it a little bit larger though. It's slightly off. So let me go ahead and unlink that. And I'm going to change this to 584. And I'll just move it into the middle here. I'm not using symmetry, but I want it in the middle of the rocket ship. Now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. I want to have a little bit of a rim around the edge, and I'm going to make it that same red color. So I'm going to do the bottom here, change it back to my red, and then I'm going to go ahead and drop that color in here. Now you can't see it because it's behind the blue layer, but I'll go ahead and grab my transform tool on uniform. And I just want to go ahead and drag up the size. I'm not going to be perfect about this. I don't want it to be just so. So if it's a little more on one side and not on the other, I'm not worried about that. All right, so we have our little window. I think I'm going to move the whole thing down a little bit though. So I'm going to group this, grab my transform tool and just kind of move, grab the group. I just grabbed the one. So make sure you select your group, drag it down. All right, so we're gonna add a little bit more embellishment to this. I wanna go to my next layer. I'm going to grab this kind of charcoal gray color and the grungy dots brush. I have it set to about 20. And I wanna go ahead and just draw out kind of like little bolts. And I'm not clipping this, I'm just making sure I stay within the white. I don't like that little one there, that bottom one, so I'm gonna start that over. I wanna give it a little bit of a curve because again, it plays into the curve of the rocket ship. Okay, I like how that looks. I like the legs here. We need to add the little gray bottom part where the fire comes out. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab another layer and I'm going to drag it below this entire thing because I want it behind the white body of the rocket ship. And I'm gonna grab this lighter gray that's in here. It's a little too green gray. Let's go ahead and make it gray gray. And I'm going to use symmetry on this one. So I do want to turn on drawing assist. And with that detail brush, I'll go ahead and just draw out my little, I'm not even sure what it's called. For as much as I like rockets and stuff like that, I have no idea what this is called, but it's the fire thingy, we'll call it that. And I'm gonna give it a little bit of a curve. And I'm gonna go ahead and drop my color in. And I had it was not closed off somewhere. And the reason that happened is because this is not closed off. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn the body off for a second, grab my brush and just close off my shape. And now when I fill it, it should be fine. And it is. So I'll turn that back on. Now that I'm doing that, I think I want to move these back up again. So I'm going to grab my transform tool. And I'm going to make it a little wider. Just below the little bolts there. And I think I might even move the bolts up a little bit. So let me go ahead and grab that. I tend to just kind of start playing around as I start doing things just to make some adjustments here and there. Okay, so we have that in place. We have our little fire thingy here. I might make it a little bit smaller though. So I'm gonna go back down to that, grab my transform tool, and I'm gonna grab uniform. And I'll just move that into the middle. All right, I'm going to go ahead and group this whole thing together because I want to adjust the direction of it as one piece. And then we're going to start adding our texture to it. I'm going to deselect these layers because they're not done yet. So I'll hit group and I'm just going to rename this And if you have the scribble function on iOS 14, you can just write it in. Okay, so I'm going to grab my transform tool with that group selected, and I'm going to rotate this where I want it. I'm also going to make it a little smaller. I want some room for my fire, and I don't want it to dominate the whole canvas. It is the main subject, but I don't want it to be overwhelming at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it about there. And part of the reason that I do this is because I'm going to add some light and shadow, and I want to be able to follow what I did for the planets. So when I put it in the direction that I want it in, it's easier to determine where it should go. So I like that there. I could always go ahead and move it if I want. Now I'm going to turn off my drawing guide because I don't need it anymore. So I've just gone to actions and turned off drawing guide. And again, I want to start adding some texture. So let's go ahead and go back into our rocket, and I'm going to see what I can clip together. I'm actually going to leave everything unclipped for right now, but what I'm going to do is add my texture to my top here and then clip those two together and then clip it to my rocket ship. So I've selected the little cap here. I'm going to add a layer and I'm going to clip it so that it's only going to be added to this layer. And I'm going to start adding some texture. So let's get into that next. Okay, we're ready to start adding some light and shadow as well as texture. And we're actually going to use a texture brush to do that. I'm going to start adding it to this cap. We had just added a clipping mask to the cap here, and I'm going to do it in kind of an orangish color. So I want to grab this orange here, and I grab my textured gouache wash brush. And this is actually a brush that builds up on itself. And I'm just going to start over here at the edge. I want to make this a little bit lighter. I want to make it really light at the edge and then build it up here. And I'm just doing a light touch. Let me zoom in so you can see it. I'm not going crazy with it. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and really focus over here. So I'm following the same light as what I did on my planet. So there's light coming this way. I want it to hit here on the rocket. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that to screen. It's a little too much, so I'm just going to back it off a little bit with the opacity. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another clipping mask. Again, if you add a clipping mask or add a layer below an existing clipping mask, it's automatically going to clip it. And I'm going to grab this much darker red here. And I'll just start the same process over on the other side. I just kind of want to lightly add some texture and shadow here. And I'm really going to focus on the edge here. Make it a lot smaller. And just focus right there. Make it a little bit bigger and just kind of blend these two together. All right, it's a little too harsh, which is fine. I'm going to back it off. I'm going to first change it to multiply, and then I'm going to back off the opacity just slightly. So we have some texture there as well as some light and shadow. I'm going to do a little bit more here though. I want to, where my light side is, I'm going to add another clipping mask. And I'm going to grab this kind of yellowish orange color and this streaky wet texture brush and just kind of come down with that brush just to give it a little bit more texture. And I'm going to change that to screen. And just drop the opacity a little. So it's just giving it a little bit more texture there. All right, so we're done our cap. I'm actually going to clip all of this together by pinching them. And I want to clip this to the body of my ship so that I get that nice texture around the edge from the ship itself. Again, I'm looking for that kind of hand-drawn look. I don't want it to be perfect because it's supposed to be retro-inspired. Let's go ahead and add some of that same kind of texture to our legs. Now, what I'm seeing as I get close in here is I moved it a little bit too much. I'm going to grab my tool here Now, this is where you can use one of the new tools that come with Procreate 5X. Right now, my bounding box is going this way. If I were to rotate it, it's not going to work for me. I actually want my little yellow thing here at the bottom, so the bounding box runs this way. I'm going to go ahead and turn on magnetics. I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to let it snap into place. Because magnetics was on, it figured out that I wanted it this direction. So now I can use my transform tool exactly the way I want it. And I'm just going to bring it down just slightly. All right, that worked perfectly. Now that doesn't stick. If I were to turn that on again, the bounding box is going to be this way. So you just need to make sure that you change it again. And I'm going to turn magnetics off so it doesn't get in my way with stuff. So I just want to add a clipping mask to this layer, and I'm going to start adding some of that same kind of texture. So I'm going to grab this orange and that textured gouache. Actually, I think I'm going to use the wet streaky texture instead. I'm going to go ahead and hit it with some light here. So again, I'm doing that light streaky texture here. And I'm going to do a little bit on the right side. These two legs in particular, because they're on this side of the ship, would have that light. And I might do a little bit here, just a touch. You're not going to have as much because that's on the other side of the ship. I'll go ahead and change that to screen, drop the opacity. And now I want to add another clipping mask and use that darker red color that we used up there. And I'm going to focus on where there needs to be shadows. So I'm going to use that same streaky wet texture brush and just add some shadowing, put some over here. So it's helping to give it that kind of rounded look. And I'm going to put some under here as well. All right. Add a little bit more to this one. All right, I'm going to go ahead and change that to multiply and drop the opacity. So now it's giving it a little bit of dimension as well as some texture. So we're playing into that whole light and shadow. And again, always make sure that when you're doing this, you follow the same direction with each element. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. And even though it's an illustration, you still want it to follow the rules of light and shadow so that it looks cohesive. Let's go ahead and add something to our little fire thingy down here, whatever it's called. If somebody knows what it's called and you want to put it in the comments, feel free to. I'm going to add a layer, and I'll go ahead and do a clipping mask. And I'm going to tap and hold to select that gray, and I just want to make a lighter color here. I'm going to use that same wet streaky texture brush because I think it kind of gives a metallic feel to it. And I'm going to hit this side. I'm going to focus more on the very right and just kind of drop it back as I go in. And I think I'm going to bring the opacity up here. And I'll change that to screen and drop down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and select that gray again. And I want to get a darker color this time. I could even grab that charcoal color. I'm going to add another clipping mask. So again, because I have that there, if I tap and add, it's going to automatically add it. And I'm going to add my shadowing over here. I'm going to focus a lot on the edge. And if you keep your brush outside of the object, you can kind of just hit it lightly there. I'm going to come in so that the two are sort of blended. I'm being really light about it right here and hitting it a lot harder here. All right, so let's go ahead and change the blend mode to multiply. I use multiply all the time for shadow. I think I want to hit, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to keep the same layer, but I'm going to grab another brush. I'm going to grab that textured gouache brush and just kind of hit the bottom here with that and just kind of build it up just for a little bit more dimension. I'm just tapping it and I'm going to build it up over here as well. All right. So we have our texture there. Now we could go ahead and add some texture here as well. I think I'm just going to add a little bit of something to the window. So I'm going to go up to this window and I want to clip it specifically to this blue. I'm going to clip the mask and I want to grab kind of that, I think I'm going to go gray color and that wet streaky texture brush. And I'm just going to kind of mimic some glass effect here. And I'm gonna get a little heavier here, and it's just gonna be broken up. I don't want it to be one long streak. It's a little too much. All right, and I'm gonna change that to screen. Just drop the opacity a little bit. All right, I'm happy with the texture on the rocket ship itself. The next thing I wanna do is go ahead and add my fire. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. We're gonna go ahead and add our fire, and I think I'm going to make the rocket ship just a little bit smaller and kind of move it up so I have room for that fire, because that's actually my favorite part of the illustration, and I really want to play into that. Now, I have my bounding box is kind of weird again. It's focused this way. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that back again. I wanna turn on magnetics, and I wanna adjust my bounding box so that it works with the rocket itself. So I'm gonna pull this down and snap it. And that way I can do it this way. I think I'm gonna make it a little bit wider. And I'll just move it where I want it. All right, so our fire is gonna be coming down here, and we're going to, it's a little too small. All right, we're going to use the dry round brush here. I actually want to give it a very hand-drawn feel to the fire. I'm going to go up here to one of these layers, and I want to make sure it's below the rocket. I'm actually going to use all three of these. The first color I want to grab is that kind of orangish yellow. And I'm just going to draw out sort of a closed rounded triangle here. And I actually do want to draw this in. I'm not going to use color fill on this. I'm going to give it a very hand-drawn look. So I'm going to go ahead and color that in. And I'm going to do another one over here that's a little bit thinner. This is a pressure-sensitive brush, so if you push down too hard, you're going to get a very thick line. And I'm not liking that too much, so let's go ahead and drop the size. All right, it's kind of hitting that star, and I don't want that. All right, there we go. So again, I'm just filling this in with this same brush. I'm not going to use the color drop because I don't want it to be a solid color. I want it to have that hand-colored feel. And I'm gonna go ahead and do this with various colors until I'm done. I'm gonna speed it up at this point just so you don't have to watch me do the same process over and over. So I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so I have all of them in place. What I also want to do is just drop them back a little bit more. I'm going to grab my wet streaky texture brush. Actually, I'm going to grab the gouache brush as my eraser, and I'm just going to kind of tap away some of it. So it almost has that sort of paper cut effect feel, and I'm going to do that to each layer. Now I did put each little drop on, each little piece of fire on its own layer, so I have a little bit more flexibility, but I am actually going to end up kind of adding these all as one layer at some point. I want to select all four and grab my transform tool, and I want to change the bounding box again. So magnetics is still on. I'm going to go ahead and flip it so it's under this piece of fire here. And I just want to make it a little thinner and just move it around until I really like exactly where it's at. And I like how that's looking. I like the texture of it. Now I could just keep these grouped together and keep them separately in case I actually want to make any changes. I'm liking how that looks. One final thing, actually, I think I am going to group them all together. So I'm going to just remove them from this group. Actually, I'll keep them in the group. I'm going to add some texture to this. So I'm going to go to my add, insert a file, and I want to pick that nebula again. And this is totally, you don't have to do this. I actually just like the effect of it. So I'm going to go ahead and make it really small, lay it over the top of the fire, and then clip it to that piece. Now, obviously, it got rid of all the color, so I want to play with my blend modes. And I think I'm going to go with overlay. It really just kind of gives, again, that hand-drawn, like sketched feel that I like. So here is with the texture, here's without. So you can see it adds light value where the texture has some light. And I could do that with a brush too, but I actually just like the file. And I think I want to move my rocket ship around a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and grab both of these groups and my transform tool, make it a little bit, maybe a little bigger. And all right, I like how that looks. So that, my friends, is how you can draw a retro rocket ship in Procreate 5X. So again, we used a combination of the selection tool with color fill to create the planets. We used our symmetry tool to create our rocket ship. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and move stuff around while I'm talking. And we've used the texture brushes to add some light and shadow. And of course, made sure that our light and shadow followed the same on all of our objects. We used some of the nebula brush from Procreate to add some of these kind of nebula clouds, as well as a combination of texture image files to add some additional texture and dimension. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to ask them in the comments or get in touch with me. If you liked this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. I am going to be posting tutorials every week, so if you want to be notified when one's out there, just hit subscribe and notification, and you'll be notified whenever I post one. Thanks so much for following along, and happy creating.